Okay, so I'm going to start off. My name is Vicki. I'm a professor at the Silverman School of Social Work, and I teach social policy and law and social work. And I'm going to present two models, but I want to just give a little background to this. So over the last year, we've talked a lot about how to have difficult conversations, as many of our students were passionately engaged in protests and counter-protests. In my school, we never got to the point of actually debating the issues. There was too much noise and emotion. This year, things have quieted down so far, so we want to offer some models for having these discussions, not necessarily about Israel or Gaza, but for most any topic. So our goal is to teach students critical thinking skills, to engage with people with different beliefs and positions, and to simply learn how to learn, the whole point of an education. So I'm going to present several models. One is debate and one is dialogue. Haiti will then present on how to draw from our own students' experiences talking about contentious issues with family and friends and what we can learn from these conversations. So a little bit about my background, since it influences what I'm presenting. My background is both as a lawyer and a social worker. So I sort of have a split personality when it comes to addressing contentious issues. One part of me, the lawyer part, used to the adversarial system, wants a full-on debate. The other part of me, the social worker, wants a nice, gentler discussion where we all get along. So I'm going to present on each, although not as a competition as to which is best, but recognizing in the spirit of social work that both have their strengths. First, the debate model, which I often use in my classes where I teach social policy, as I said. So my goal here is very different from the debates I might have had as a lawyer. It's not so much about winning, but a way for me to disrupt the groupthink that often characterizes social work, where nearly all my students are liberals or progressives, and also very young and very sure of their positions. They tend to see the world in black and white, as I admit I did at their age. This also means they often bypass, ignore, or at the worst, demonize those that think differently than them. So I want them to walk in another's shoes and will often quietly choose those students the most adamant about their beliefs to argue against those beliefs. Both as a practical matter, in our pluralist society, they will encounter such different beliefs, including among their clients. And because from an advocacy perspective, social work is very big on advocacy, they need to know the other side in order to argue against it. So what I'm going to lay out is everything from sort of the format and the structure and the advantages of using each model. And I'm going to start with the debate model. So I need to share my screen. Good? Okay. So first, I want to talk about debates and what the advantages of them are, right? So one is it promotes critical thinking. This idea of having to know both sides of an issue and go out and find evidence, not beliefs, not what you've heard, what you read somewhere but don't remember the source, but you actually have to find information and figure out what sources are credible and how to present on them. So in that sense, I think a debate is really excellent in terms of promoting critical thinking and looking for information to support your position and understanding the other side. Because in a debate, you're incentivized to search for evidence on both sides. It also exposes students to beliefs different than their own. As I said before, we might have a conversation about a particular issue in class, and everyone seems to have the same points to make again and again. So this is no, you don't get to do that. You have to look at beliefs different than your own. It also enhances communication skills, because if you spend time talking about how to present and what kinds of language to use and what's persuasive, it enhances communication skills. So if you think of other situations, not necessarily a debate where you're presenting in front of people, this gives students an opportunity to learn how to do that. It also teaches emotional regulation, which might be surprising to hear that a debate does that, especially when we've seen some of the presidential debates lately. But if done properly, you actually are teaching students how to talk respectfully and in ways that people will listen to them, and that actually reduces the emotions in the room. So it's very helpful in that way. And it also fosters teamwork and collaboration when done in pairs and teams. Okay, so the thing that's, I think, one of the most important aspects is constructing a debate question, right? In a way that, and I'll go through all the different dimensions of it, it's debatable in a positive way, not a negative way. So the first thing is clarity. A single claim to be proved or disproved. So in the example, are the tactics police use effective? There's too many things they can talk about. It's too focused on just police tactics. But if you say something like, should stop and frisk be used as a police tactic, I just caught a spelling error, okay, then that narrows it down. Okay, so that's an advantage to really looking for clarity with a debate question. And is as a piece of that, open-ended, avoiding questions that suggest the answer. And so Michael, I had some email correspondence with Michael about debate questions, and we were passing them back and forth actually on Gaza and Israel. And I decided not to use that in this, but it was a good experiment for me because I tried to change it to my bias, the question. And then I realized that there should be a way to write it that's more open-ended. So instead of saying gender affirming care should be available to people under the age of 18, I would change it to should gender affirming care be available to people under the age of 18? A subtle difference, but you really can't read the person's position in that. Whereas the first one, you're starting with a suggestion of how it should come out. It should be controversial, an issue that has strong opinions on both sides. So here's an example here. Should children be protected from harm? Yes, of course. Who would argue the other way, right? But this is the more specific way. To what extent does the current child welfare system adequately protect children? Right? So if you use phrases like should or to what extent, and you're more specific, it leaves more room for a debate. So you want some controversy. That's the point of it. The other thing is to avoid questions that are not scientifically or empirically grounded. So they have to be debatable. So the idea of, is God real? You can't debate that, right? And the next no that I had, should countries make any effort to address climate change? I mean, at this point, there's a consensus that climate change exists. So to debate that would send it in the wrong way. And so the debate question might be, to what extent should countries address climate change? And the next thing is objective, avoid questions that are subjective opinions. So my example here, because my granddaughter and I debate this all the time, is whether hot dogs should only be eaten with mustard. And we go back and forth, mustard, ketchup. We ask Alexa, what's the most popular thing? And we actually have a debate over it, but it's obviously very subjective. And it's a long-running debate, I must say. Okay. So these are your basic formats, and I'll do this quickly because you can have the slides. And I'm putting up presidential slides for some of these, not recent ones, because I don't want any bad feelings to be triggered today. But this is Obama and, oh God, who is that? Romney, right? Okay, seems like so long ago. So the speaking formats is constructive, is the longest when you're constructing the argument. You lay out the position and evidence for it, and you anticipate and respond to opposing arguments. Then there's the exchange, a cross-examination, questions from the opposing side. Or you might integrate questions or observations from the opposing side during constructive speeches. As a professor, I sometimes interrupt my students to go back and forth, but I don't think I would do that in this kind of exercise because they've prepared a statement. They're usually a bit anxious, so it's better in my mind to let them just continue with it. And then a rebuttal, which is shorter, not new lines of argument, but a focused response to an opening speech. And this is the debate order, and this is, just to give you an example of how much time, 5 to 7 minutes is actually a long time to talk, right? And these are some tips on it. If grading on preparation, quality of research, ability to illuminate an issue, not on who won. So that takes away some of the competitive aspects of debates, which I don't want to enter into my classroom. Like this is a winning thing. So I wouldn't grade it, first of all, but if I was to grade it, I would look on how prepared people were. asking students to act as judges to keep them engaged. So one of the things I've noticed when I did debates is you can have the rest of the class tune out. Because, sometimes they're really interested based on the topic, other times they're not, they're really tuned out. So you can make them judges, you can open up questions from them at the end of the debate. There's different ways to engage. And after the debate, continue discussing the issue. And for the debaters, this is one of my favorite questions. Social work students are great at role playing. So they just role play a conservative, even though they don't believe in it, to the hilt. And so then I asked them what it was like to take a position you didn't agree with. So we sort of process that sense of another argument. And then I asked, and the debaters, what did you learn that you didn't know before? And did anyone change their mind? So you end up with a reflection piece after a debate, which I think is really helpful in the classroom. Now I'm going to talk about dialogue, okay? So dialogue is more open-ended, less structured form of discussion, which emphasizes understanding and collaboration. You see common ground and creative solutions rather than a win or one side over another side. So the advantage is it encourages inclusion rather than polarization or divisiveness. It builds active listening skills, which I'm going to talk about as one of the methods that you use in dialogue. It recognizes the role of emotions because you're tuned into how other people are feeling and responding based on that. And it provides a model for contentious discussions outside of the classroom, because the debate model is something you might use in a classroom, but not in conversations with people in general. But this dialogue teaches you how to have those conversations outside. And so I'm going to talk a lot about active listening. I know the social workers might know that, but I'm not sure if other people do. It's a relational style of dialogue that shifts the focus to the speaker's words, both to fully understand what they are saying and to signal that they have been heard. So lots of times when people are talking, they're formulating their response to what the person is saying rather than listening to what the person is saying. So active listening is the opposite of that. You're putting your response to the side and you're listening to what that person has to say. And you want to make sure that they think that they've been fully heard. And I think this is really just helpful in life in general. In terms of, especially in this polarized time, that when, I have this imagination of how I'm going to argue to someone who's voting different than me. But when I think about what I want to say and what I should say, it's two different things. And what I should say is more like active listening, not what I want to say, which is sort of just to state my position loudly. So these are active listening skills. You ask open-ended questions that don't elicit a yes or no answer. Patience, avoiding interruptions, which is really hard to do for me anyhow. Reflecting back what is said by paraphrasing the speaker using different words. Asking clarifying questions to understand the speaker's position more fully. And empathize, acknowledge speaker's feelings and emotions. I can see why you feel that way. And verbal and nonverbal feedback that shows one is listening. So it's really like smiling, eye contact, leaning in, short affirmations like I see, I understand. It's a whole different way of having a conversation. I sort of, as an aside, ironically enough, I use dialogue in training judges in family court. So I'm in the adversarial system with that model. And what I do is I train judges active listening skills, because in family court in particular, that's where they're very helpful. And they really adapt to that. It's really, because they're acting part social work, part judge, part everything in a family court proceeding. So this is my example. So in the social work profession, there is now a controversy over whether child welfare services should be abolished. And there are two sides to this. Some think the whole system should be abolished. Other people think the system should be reformed, right? So this is an imagined dialogue using active listening skills as to how to do it from a dialogue point of view. So student A says, the child welfare system tears families apart and does little to help them. So student B responds with an open-ended question, right? can you tell me a bit more why you think that? So they're not right away saying, well, I don't agree with that, and this is why, right? So student A says a little bit more. The system is too quick to take children away, causing trauma when there are less extreme ways to help. Student B responds and can use all these active listening techniques. First, by reflecting back what was said and paraphrasing it. So you think that decisions are made too rashly without the family's best interests in mind and that there are better ways. I agree with you. So they're finding common ground immediately instead of opposing each other. And I can understand why you feel that way. So they're empathizing, right? And then this is like the crucial question. Do you have some ideas on how we could keep children safe while preserving families? So this is the main debate. Those on the abolitionist side don't always acknowledge that we need to protect children or think they're protecting children by abolishing the system. Those on keep the system are focused on the children. So this is a way of problem solving and also stating the underlying position. How do we keep children safe while preserving families, as opposed to a debate situation where you would be saying, you know, oh, but we must preserve children's safety. That's the main objective. And that's the first thing you have to think about. This is more problem solving and open-ended questions to keep talking about it. And so one thing to think about is, when is this more appropriate than something else? So when you have to make a decision about something, then a debate might be it. But when you're trying to problem solve together and it's more collaboration, then that could be dialogue. But we mix it up in our classes. We have one exercise that we do about different political, philosophical beliefs, ideological beliefs. I use dialogue, I use debate, someone else uses dialogue on it. So you can be flexible about it. So our best intentions, sometimes people get upset. So here are some tips for the classroom. And this is the first one, and I call out Michael Lewis here, establish norms of engagement. He has these brilliant norms of engagement we all ask him for constantly. He updates them. And there's, I think, a whole video about them, right? From ACERT. I think we've talked about them. And different professors have different ways of doing this. One way is, I think, like Michael Lewis does, is to give them to the students, and he has this wonderful sort of talking points that he tells students about the norms of engagement. Other professors have students construct them together, and they spend part of their class doing that. The next thing is to model these norms of engagement yourself as the teacher. And so think about times when a student says something that you immediately respond very quickly, and you might be getting upset over something. So to remind yourself that you also are restrained by those norms of engagement and not to model defensiveness. You can interrupt to remind students of these norms if the debate or dialogue turns personal and emotional. You can say, let's take a pause here. You can diffuse heated moments by noting the intensity of the moment, but also the need to switch gears so that others can contribute and other aspects of the issues can be considered. So I'm sure all of us have been in a classroom where you have two students really going at it. And at one point you're like, wow, this is great. They're so interested and engaged. I love seeing this. But then you also start to realize a few minutes in that it's going on too long and other students are shutting down, right? So one thing you can do is say, let's hear, these are obvious things, but sometimes I forget to do them in the moment. It's like, okay, let's move to other people now. Let's move on with this. Let's switch gears a bit after thanking them for their contributions, but diffusing the heat at that moment. Another thing that often happens also is it might not be an acrimonious kind of argument going on, but it might be repetitive, that students keep restating their positions over and over again, and they're not adding new information. And so that's a point to move on to solutions and to change the conversation to another aspect of it. There's times when you might be challenged by a student, and one thing that you can do is ask for more time to respond, so that you're not setting up sort of a contentious dynamic in front of the class. If the student is challenging you. These are all things that have happened in our social work classes. It might be they'll challenge you on content. I had one student challenge me because I wasn't calling on her enough in front of the whole class. And so these are just good things to learn how to say, I really like to think about that and give you a good response. So let's move on, but I'll get back to that with you, something like that. And then and this has also happened in our classrooms, you have students who leave angry and upset. And so you can reach out to specific students or invite students to contact you after class to process any of those moments. And you can debrief the next class if helpful. And I say if helpful, because sometimes it's best to move on. I mean, in social work, we tend to process a lot. So our inclination is to process any sort of dissension or any tension in the classroom at the next classroom. But sometimes you can also move on and use these other ways of doing it during office hours or with individual students. And that's mine. I am done. Show. And so now we hear from Katie, who I'm really excited to hear from because she has a whole different way of learning how to do this.
Thank you, Vicki. That was so awesome. And I learned so much. I love that. It was really good. So much to think about. And we talked about, well, I should introduce myself. I'm Katie Winkelstein-Duveneck, and I'm a doctoral lecturer in the English department. And I teach mostly first year writing, but also other English classes. And so Vicki and I talked about how our approaches were really complementary, not opposite at all, but really different and complementary. So I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Share. Okay. And I'm gonna play from start. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Yes. Okay. Amazing. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about two things, which are using student strengths in the classroom and then expanding our view of what argument is. So one, using student strengths and experiences. So many of our students, not all of them, but many live at home with their families. And as young adults, they're figuring out which of their family's values or their parents' values they share and which they don't, normal young adult stuff. And they're navigating this while living with their families and playing important roles as givers and receivers of care. Like, I mean, I'm sure you all know this, so, I'm preaching to the choir, but just to think about this, they're taking care of family members, they're providing translation for family members, they're being part of the family, also being, if they're living with their parents, they're being their parents' kid while also being a young adult. And they may differ politically, or they may have different values in their families. And so a lot of our students have experience with difficult conversations, maybe on a daily basis or on a regular basis. Not to say that we need to make our students talk about this or pressure them to talk about this, or require them to discuss their lives, although it does come up, and it can be a great conversation, but just to kind of know and think about the wealth of experiences and knowledge that they bring to the classroom, and kind of what we're working with. And it may come up and be a point of commonality. In my classes, it frequently comes up, actually. Like people will say, bring something up and say, well, I just don't talk to my dad about that. And somebody else will say, oh, me too, same. So then you have a point of commonality, even if you even if you don't agree, you're starting from kind of like this point of commonality. And living with people that you may agree with somewhat and not, and just be kind of growing in that. So I think they have a lot of skills in grace and listening and tolerating conflict, or in fixing a rift. I've noticed a lot of kind of self-healing happening among students over the years, which I found really interesting. And just to say that we can take advantage of this and use it, and we are using it, whether we're aware of it or not. I think we are using it. It's a strength that we have. And this is a quote from, I was talking about this with my colleague, Nicole Eitzen Delgado, who teaches English and Latinx literature here. And this was what she said. She said, a lot of our students have immigrant parents who create a home environment that closely mimics what they left behind in their birth country. This is a survival strategy in response to the lack of control they often experience outside the home, where they are labeled other by dominant society. As a result, many of our students have split lives, exploring their non-American sides at home and their American side at school. The difficult conversations happen when they try to bridge their two worlds, which they necessarily must do to consolidate their identity. And I loved that quote. I thought that was really interesting and thought-provoking. And then let's see, what else did I want to say? Oh, and then, oops. So I guess for me, a lot of it comes down to the sense of belonging in the classroom. And I think most of the conflicts that I've had in the classroom, or a lot of them, have come down to kind of like a student not feeling a sense of belonging. I think that often that's a big theme that comes up, where it's something important to think about. Because I think what we're trying to do, especially in a writing classroom, is facilitate and protect this process of collective and individual change. And we don't want students to feel like they have to double down and defend a value that they're in the process of questioning. And a sense of belonging is key, I think, to be able to bring as much of ourselves as possible to the classroom. And how we do that is a bigger conversation that I think is important to have as well. Let's see. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is expanding our view of what argument is. So in, oops, what did I do? You guys, sorry. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so many models, I think, of persuasive writing focus on agree and disagree. And agree and disagree are great, and they're important. And I loved seeing that view of it from Vicki's presentation in the debate. But I think in first year writing, a lot of students come in having done a lot of kind of prescriptive, persuasive writing, arguing, I agree, disagree, or partly disagree and partly agree. And that includes first year writing textbooks, which I use parts of the textbook, they say, I say, and I love it. It's a great textbook in many ways, but it does kind of focus on that agree, disagree, partly agree. But I think most conversations in life are not agree and disagree arguments. And most academic arguments are also not in that form of agree and disagree. And I think in politics, for example, there's not necessarily a lot of models for meaningful and respectful dialogue. The debates that are called debates, like the presidential debates, often are not debates in the sense that Vicki was talking about them. And so what I like to do in my classroom is do this activity of brainstorming different ways of responding to an argument at the beginning of the semester. And I love doing this. And start with agree, disagree, partly agree, and partly disagree. And then students kind of call out ideas and brainstorm and add to the list. So here's a real student brainstorm. And so we started with agree, we started with these three, and then they added like complicate and simplify and point out irony and exemplify, provide an example of, extend or say you didn't go far enough, or qualify or say you went too far, but I agree with you, or introduce a new idea, or question underlying assumptions, or provide evidence for it, or ask what led to this, or show how an argument is conflating two different things. And so those are just a few that they came up with. And I think that I like starting the semester with this because it kind of sets a tone or sets the groundwork for how we're going to talk about things. And so at least, yeah, here we go. So it's kind of more like real life, how people respond to each other. It expands our framework to other options beyond oppositional. I think it's a good preparation for academic writing and thinking. And even if we're disagreeing, we're doing a common process, because real disagreements do happen where people really are on different sides, do very passionately disagree and have strong feelings about it, but at least we're doing kind of the same process as we do that. And also it's fun. So, and fun is important. Thank you. So wait, how do I get out of full screen? Oh, here we go. And I'll stop sharing. And I have this image of aspen trees here because the aspen tree is a clonal organism. It's genetically one organism from my understanding, and yet we have a whole grove of individual trees. And to me, it symbolizes the writing classroom, where we're working on our individual processes collectively, and that's where the growth happens. So that's my presentation, and I would love to hear from all of you, your thoughts, and I know Vicki would too, thoughts or questions, or if anybody has examples of productive, difficult conversations they've had in class, but just to open it up to everybody.